Hi, I'm Ben Fuda, host of PBS Wisconsin's online gardening series, Let's Grow Stuff. Welcome to this year's virtual Wisconsin Garden and Landscape Expo. I hope you'll enjoy this special educational presentation, and remember, you can leave your questions for our presenter at any time by typing them into the chat, and we'll ask them in a live Q&A at the end of the session. Also, don't forget to stick around and check out everything this virtual event has to offer. From inspiring garden tours to an interactive exhibitor mall, there's something for everyone. And thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy the show.
Cornelius. I am a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and I work for UW-Madison, the UW-Madison Law School's Great Lakes Indigenous Law Center, as well as the Intertribal Agriculture Council.
And I am Claire Luby. I work in the horticulture department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we are really excited to talk to you today about a number of projects that we have been working on together in partnership with others in the region. One of these is the Indigenous Research Garden at the University of Wisconsin Arboretum. And then we'll also talk about some different land education initiatives that we have developing Indigenous curriculum at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So back in 2017, Dan was instrumental in organizing the Food Sovereignty Symposium Festival. And this was an event that brought together a lot of people from around the region to share and talk about different elements of food sovereignty for Native nations in the Great Lakes area. And so I was lucky enough to attend this conference and met a few people there. One of whom is named Jessica Greendeer, and she had been working hard to locate seeds that had connections with the Ho-Chunk Nation, but that were no longer being grown by community members. And she was really interested in seeing if she could grow out larger amounts of these different varieties and get them back into the hands of the community and get people growing those seeds again and having that connection with these corn, particularly corn varieties. And so we started talking, and we were able to partner and use some land at one of the UW research stations, and we grew out about 20 different varieties of corn that summer. And then she was able to take those and continue working with them and growing them out in her current role and sharing those with other members of the community. And so this project really launched a whole series of projects around this idea of seed rematriation, or this concept of basically getting seeds back into the hands of people to begin working with them again. And so we, together with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, along with Dan, and Rowan White of the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, wrote a grant that to the Baldwin Wisconsin Idea Fund. And this is a grant program through the University of Wisconsin that funds projects that support the Wisconsin idea, or the concept of basically making sure that the bounds of the university are the bounds of the state, and that the research and outreach work that happens at the university be beneficial to all members of the state. And so while the horticulture department at UW has done a good job of working with farmers in many different ways, there really had been no collaborations with any of the Native nations in the state of Wisconsin. And so this project was intended to at least work on this seed rematriation and and development of culturally relevant curriculum around seed stewardship. And so we partnered again with Intertribal Agriculture Council on some beginner farmer trainings where we had Indigenous farmers and ranchers share their experience with people who were interested in getting into this. And we also developed a cohort that was a 9-month-long cohort with the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network that was online and in person, and basically covered or was a development of a culturally relevant seed stewardship program, and really intended to help people increase their skills in seed stewardship and become sort of resources for others in their community who might also be interested in saving seeds. And so Rowan White, who you see in the photo here, was really instrumental in designing this curriculum. So we sort of launched all of these different projects, and it's been really exciting to watch them develop. One of the other pieces that we had as part of this was a collaboration with the University of Wisconsin Arboretum, and I'll let Dan talk about that.
Thank you, Claire. So in moving to transitioning to talking about the partnership with the UW Arboretum, I think it's important to recognize the land that we're on. And this is Ho-Chunk territory. This is Ho-Chunk land. But this land has been, Madison, the Des-Jope area, has been a capital city for a long time. This has been a huge center of population of people living here going back hundreds and really thousands of years. And recognizing that history and thinking about what it means is going to be part of what we're going to be talking about here today. Going back to when the first Europeans and Americans came into the area, what did they see? What was here back in the 1830s, the 1840s? This excerpt from the Charles Brown Papers. This is talking about there are some traders that came into the area, and they met with a camp of Ho-Chunks at present-day Tenney Park, and they talk about not only the accuracy of the Ho-Chunk hunters in hunting geese and ducks, but they also talk about the wild rice that grew around the edge of most of the lakes and in the low swampy ground. And I think that looking at this type of surviving documentation, it helps to think about what did this land used to be. And today the area is known for the lakes. Water quality in the lakes is not always the finest, which is the main reason why wild rice is not as prevalent here today as what it once was historically. But how does it change someone's perspective of the landscape of today when we have floods? Those floods are going in the low ground. Most of that area is historic wild rice fields. And so how does that perspective, does someone's perspective shift when you think about, 150 years ago, this area that now is, is a street or parking lot or housing that used to be a wild rice field. And I know for myself, I'm also a grower. I grow corn, pumpkins, harvest wild rice, make maple syrup, and I'm up at the Dane County Farmers Market. I have wild rice. I've got hominy corn up there, and part of what these efforts are, it's also to get people thinking of what did the historic food system of this area look like? What were the foods that made up that food system? It was rice and corn were two of the main ones. And so when we look at a map of the area, this was a map developed in the early 1900s based off of archaeological excavations and other documentation. You see the immense concentration of effigy mounds, of the historic trails going through the area, of fields, and and even of some of the rice beds. And when you look at this map as one indicator, if you walk the landscape today, you'll still see a good number of those surviving effigy mounds, but the majority of them have been destroyed. But part of what our efforts are is to is to think about, what did this landscape used to look like, and and what can we learn today from how people lived on the landscape historically. So thinking about that historic food system, this is just a snapshot of what it would have looked like, of husking corn. You see the squash drying in the bottom left corner there. And you go into a grocery store today, most grocery stores, you're probably not going to find dried squash. That was a staple food of not just of the Ho-Chunk here in the area, but a lot of most indigenous nations would have had dried squash, and drying would have been one of the main ways that food was preserved, because of course you didn't have refrigerators or mason jars for canning. So drying historically was one of the main ways that food was preserved. And then, looking at, Claire was talking about the seeds. These are some of those historic seeds, and then the traditional tools. And then I think it's just fascinating. And I do want to thank Bill Gardner from the UW Geography Department for sharing some of these photos here. But looking at the historic mounds there versus the ridges, and both of those would have been used. So some of these efforts we're not totally recreating the historic practices and ways of growing, but bringing some of the seeds back. And and looking at how can we use a little bit of modern equipment to more closely mimic a traditional approach. That's part of what these projects are about as well, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail as we transition here to talking about the Arboretum Garden. I'll turn it back over to Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So that was really great context, I think, for why we approached the Arboretum and began this collaboration, was really to think about the historic landscape, not just from what today we think of as sort of an ecological preservation landscape, but really a working landscape. And as part of that, we started working with the Arboretum on an Indigenous research garden. And so the idea here was, you can see this in this photo, was to grow out corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, amaranth, and engage local Native families as well in the process. And here you can see that the other part of this was to explore some different growing technique. Instead of sort of plowing up this entire grassy area, we just tilled in these strips and planted directly into those, so as to minimize exposing the soil and sort of learn more about how this technique might be used in other areas. And sort of you can think back on that photo Dan showed of the historic fields and those rows, and sort of this is what we're sort of exploring with these techniques. So some of the crops that we grew in partnership with local youth and families were corn, pumpkins, amaranth, sunflowers, and some beans. And this was in the garden last year, and the project has morphed a little bit in the time since. But these would have all been crops that would have been very important parts of historic foodways, and are still important elements of foodways today. So the other thing that we wanted to do was engage students in learning about all of these different elements that we've been talking about. And so you can see up in the top there, right, a sort of classic classroom that you might think of at UW, which is, students in rows sitting in seats, all looking up at the front of the room. Those tables are bolted in place. You can't move them. And so this kind of classroom really facilitates that lecture style, right? Someone in the front of the room talking at you, and sort of learning information in that way. And so what we wanted to do was really engage with the land and with indigenous foodways, and get students out and doing activities where they would actually learn how to grow different plants, how to process, how to cook, and really start listening to those seasonal cycles, and how they can, what the land is saying at any given time of year, and how we as people can really learn from that, and how that ties in with the foodways of this place. And so Dan and myself and Erwin Goldman in the Department of Horticulture have been working on developing a couple of different courses that give students these hands-on experiences.
The first course that the three of us had taught together was the horticulture class last spring, and one of the exciting parts of that class was we had again worked with the UW Arboretum in putting together a sugar bush, and not just for sugar maple, but you can see here, if you look close at that tree, some people may be saying, well, that doesn't look like a sugar maple to me. That's actually a box elder tree. So we tapped sugar maples, box elder, and then we also tapped some black walnuts. Oddly, the black walnuts the sap didn't run last, or barely really ran last spring. I found that to be the case with the trees that I tap as well. I'm not sure exactly why, but that's one of those questions of, so why didn't the black walnuts run in 2020? I couldn't tell you exactly, but having these type of learning and educational opportunities, it also opens up new avenues for research, including research that is more focused on supporting and engaging Native communities. So that was, that I think is one of the big questions that came out of, why didn't those black walnuts run? But one of the other, insights that I had come across in doing the sugar bush is, you can see here, this is a traditional spile tap. And so when we tap that tree, we're just really nicking just the very outer portion of the tree. And the nice thing is that the tree will be able to heal faster. And, and there's a higher sugar content in that outer layer. But when we were doing this, I was carving that spile, and I turned to David Stevens, the curator of the Arboretum and one of our close partners on these efforts. And I just asked David, when do you think the last time that these trees were tapped traditionally like this? And he stops, looks at me and says, these trees have never been tapped since the Arboretum was created in the 1930s. So, in some ways, these are just small demonstration efforts, but to me, that broader significance is to bring back, as Claire said, of the working landscape to the Arboretum and into campus. I think is symbolically is huge, and I think that it's offering a lot of new opportunities for just thinking about education more deeply, including the research component of that education, and and what can we be doing to be developing stronger partnerships and connections with tribes throughout Wisconsin and the region, while being able to have both this classroom and this laboratory right on campus is a great opportunity for being able to do it. This was right before the pandemic really took effect, or the lockdowns took effect back in March. I think for a lot of people, this was probably the last event that they were at with other people in person. So we took the collective experiences from the spring class, and a lot of the discussions that came out of that class led to creation of a first year interest group class on on campus that was hosted in the educational policy department. And it wasn't the exact same course as what we taught in the spring, because there was more of a focus on education, thinking about education, and then with language. And all of the first year interest groups, or FIGs as they're called, they're limited to 20 students, and they're all first year incoming students. We had 15. Ours was actually capped at 15, because one of the linked classes, Principles of Environmental Science, that was the maximum number of seats that they could hold for the freshmen. But each FIG will have the main core course with 2 linked courses. So Principles of Environmental Science was one of the linked courses. And then we also had it linked to Introduction to Ojibwe that was taught by Brian McGinnis. So all of the students in this FIG were able to take all 3 of those classes together with one another. And it was a good opportunity for them to be able to have that small cohort to be able to connect with. And I will say that it was a bit of a challenging semester to be teaching. And I'm sure it was even more of a challenging semester for the students to be entering and starting their collegiate careers. This was the first class that we had in person. This was at the end of September, because when classes started, there was about 1 week of class in person, and then the COVID cases started skyrocketing, and there was a couple of the dorms were locked down, and all learning went virtual. We weren't sure if we were going to be able to have any in-person classes, but it was pretty cool. It was pretty exciting to finally get together and to be able to see everyone in person, for them to get to meet each other in person. And we figured, what better introduction for the in-person learning than to be able to actually braid some of the corn that we grew at the UW Indigenous Research Garden this year. So that was our first class, and did want to connect this past semester's class with this broader effort. And as I was saying before, of when opening up this presentation, of what does it mean to give a land acknowledgement, to acknowledge that we're on Ho-Chunk territory, or for wherever you are, that you're acknowledging the indigenous, whether it be territory or ancestral homelands. In the case of UW-Madison, there's been Our Shared Future initiative. The plaque was created and dedicated in the summer of 2019. I've been a part of a couple of different of these grant applications that campus has supported. Different departments can apply to host the plaque, and you do different educational programming. One of the events with the UW Law School that we had done was we brought Piscataqui Greg Johnson from Lac du Flambeau and John Greendeer from Ho-Chunk to campus for a class on traditional ice fishing. We ran into a little bit of a challenge in preparing for this class, in that we did apply to the Wisconsin DNR for a permit to be able to spear muskie on Lake Mendota. We applied a couple of months before the class, and we had numerous discussions with them, and that permit was ultimately denied. And so when you've got the former president of the Ho-Chunk Nation, John Greendeer, who's coming down and is excited to get out on the lake and exercise his treaty rights. You got the DNR saying, no, you can't do it. And we're kind of stuck in the middle of, we're doing a class. That was a bit of I think of an exercise in thinking about, what does sovereignty truly mean? And if we want to acknowledge the land and the territory, what does that mean? And I know for our students, we talked through all of this, and it was a pretty interesting, I guess, situation. Part of how we dealt with it was, coincidentally, I happened to get a call from the Arboretum the day before this class, and they had a deer that was harvested, and so we had John Green Deer went through the process of traditionally of breaking down a deer, and then we had groups of 5 students that cycled through the ice fishing shanty and were able to see the demonstration on the spearing, but we didn't actually spear a muskie. So I think that for a lot of people, it was a little bit cold that day. Not everyone was really dressed for being out on the ice, but it was a great opportunity to connect with the land and and to learn from two people that I very much respect and have learned a lot from with John and Greg. So I think that really it brings up a deeper question of how can the University of Wisconsin help to better support Native communities in the state and beyond, and in the process, how can the university help to support rural communities as well? Because a lot of the issues that Native nations face are the same issues that a lot of rural communities face. And as I mentioned before, of having the space on campus for the classrooms, these outdoor interactive hands-on classrooms, it also provides a laboratory. And that's part of the approach that we've taken with the Indigenous Research Garden, where this year we planted 5 different types of Ojibwe corn. The 2 corns that you see with the red and the yellow are both Mohawk corns that were grown the year before. This year we grew 5 different Ojibwe corns, 3 different Bear Islands, 1 Turtle Mountain White, and then Red Lake Flint corn. And we grew them all together under the same or similar conditions. And it was really interesting to see that one of those Bear Islands, finished from the time we planted till the time we harvested. The first ears started ripening and being ready to harvest within 70 days. The longest took over 115, almost 120 days. Some of it was still actually going when the first frosts hit. So you think about that difference of if you have a corn that's 1 month or over almost a month and a half faster than another. If you're up in northern Wisconsin, it's going to be a lot more likely to have a successful harvest if you've got a corn that is that's 1 month faster than another one. So most of those seeds that we harvested from the garden this year are going back to Indigenous communities throughout Wisconsin, and it's pretty exciting to be able to provide that type of support. And I think the other great thing is that this is right on Monroe Street. It's a high visibility, it's a high traffic area. And part of the inspiration behind approaching the Arboretum and the inception of this project was, the Arboretum has done fantastic work over the years. But personally, when I hear about discovering the use of fire as a ecological restoration tool, and the land management tool, and that they're discovering in the 1930s, the use of fire, just kind of scratch my head and shake my head of Indigenous people have been using fire as a land management tool for thousands of years. And, so just to bring more, at least of a recognition, a respect, and to the impact that Native people have had on this landscape going back thousands of years. That's part of what this project is helping to provide, is at least giving a space where we can be growing our traditional foods again, and really identifying what are some of those priority research areas. So you can see here of those different corns. The long one, I call it the Bear Island Tall, is it's kind of in the middle here. You can see how much taller that one is. And then we also grew we grew wild rice there this year as well for seed and just to get a bit more of a knowledge and a familiarity with growing it under more controlled conditions. And I think part of the broader impact of all of this work is, the 2020 has been a challenging year for most people. And I've seen that some classrooms, some schools have gone to more of outdoor learning. And my question is, why does it take a pandemic to think about the need for outdoor learning, for more hands-on education, and and then the lack of space to be able to do it? That was one of the challenges with the class that we hosted this fall, is where can we even go to have a fire on campus, to be able to parch wild rice or to cook hominy corn. A lot of my work coming in has brought Native communities together and hosting big intertribal events such as this one. And, that power of getting outside of a conference center and being on the land, being able to cook over an open fire, the difference of the relationships that it helps for people to form among not only themselves, but deepening the relationship with the foods that we're focusing on. And that's part of the power and the impact of how the classroom itself can impact learning and overall outcomes. I wish that we had more of these type of spaces here on campus, and still we're having discussions not only with the Arboretum but with the rest of campus of, what would it take for us to be able to harvest some wild ramps? And I get the challenges of, you can't have the whole city going and harvesting these resources, or they'll get wiped out. But I think that and for people who may be watching and listening to this presentation, I think part of it is thinking about what is each of our collective impact on the landscape, and how can we, how through our activities can we be supporting more of a healthy landscape? And, part of the challenge is living in a city that not everyone can go and harvest ramps at the same time. But I think of having more of these type of spaces, I think it does help to facilitate better learning outcomes, and I think it can help people to connect better with one another as well. So thank you for tuning in. If you have questions and want to contact us, here are both of our emails. We're happy to hear from you, and hope to see you out there in person at some point in the near future.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, I'm Ben Fuda, host of Let's Grow Stuff. Well, thank you for joining us for the virtual Wisconsin Garden and Landscape Expo. And of course, we just finished learning about the Indigenous Heritage Gardening happening here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Dan and Claire are now joining us live to answer the questions that you've been sending in during their presentation. And don't forget, you can keep asking those questions as we're chatting here, wherever you may be watching, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, or in the live stream itself. And also don't forget, this talk will be archived, so if there's anything you want to go back and reference, you can see that at wigardenexpo.com/schedule, or again, on any of the platforms you may be watching, YouTube or Facebook. Dan and Claire, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, Dan, the first question I'll throw your way here, and it's wondering, where did you find the seeds sort of to begin this cultivation in the first place? If these were sort of had fallen out of cultivation, where did you start with sourcing these?
From really a variety of different places, and they've kind of, a lot of them just have found me over the years, and to help to steward and to take care of them, and to help to get them back out to those communities. So that's, a lot of it is we've got a network of growers, and it's not as much of an ownership. It's really of that stewardship, taking care of them and being able to pass them on.
So Claire, a good question for you, I think, as a plant breeder. We have a couple of questions actually from both Teresa and Bill wondering about cross-pollination. So if you're growing these multiple varieties in the Arboretum, is cross-pollination something you worry about or think about, or how do you sort of control for that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something everyone needs to be thinking about if they are growing any kind of plant for seed production. Thinking about if it's outcrossing or self-pollinated, and of course, corn, as you mentioned, is tends to outcross and is wind pollinated. And so we actually did a lot of hand pollination in the Arboretum garden to make sure that varieties were being crossed with other plants of that same type. The other way that we controlled for pollination was by planting at different times, so that the pollination windows for the different types of corns wouldn't overlap, and those were then allowed to naturally pollinate, and we didn't have to hand pollinate in that case. So yes, definitely consideration for all of the seed work.
So Dan, we have a question from Becky, and she's wondering, can descendants of other indigenous nations, she's saying specifically Cherokee and Illinois, help with this project in some way, whether through growing or saving, and help in any way with any of these efforts? Looks like we might have...
Yeah, I mean, this past year was kind of... We weren't able to have... in-person workshops to the same degree with the pandemic as we had in the past, but hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to have some more opportunities for people to get involved in person.
Excellent. And then we have a question here coming in from Barb, and Claire, I'll toss this one your way. She's wondering, are there ways that non-UW students can get involved and learn more, participate, and support the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as Dan mentioned, we did have, before the pandemic, we had a number of public workshops co-hosted by the Arboretum, and I assume those will start up again moving forward. And so many of those were posted, in conjunction with the Arboretum or through UW. And so those were open to the public. So I'd say keep an eye out for that, or get on those listservs if you're interested in learning about future programming.
And Dan, we have a question from Jody. She noticed you'd mentioned tapping black walnuts for sap, and she's wondering what that sap is used for.
We use it just like using maple. It's great for eating. It's got a little bit more of a nutty flavor and taste to it.
And sort of on that same topic, someone's wondering, is making your own maple syrup, if they have black walnut, now we know, and again, maple trees in their yards or spaces, is this something people can do at home? And if so, sort of what do they need to get started?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all you really need is just a pot and a stove, and you can cook it down. If you have like a turkey fryer, it's nice to do it outside. It really you have a lot of condensation, of course, that's going to come off from that boil. But you can just cook it right on your stove top. It's helpful to have just a candy thermometer. You can use it to take that temperature, and that's an indication that you're getting to your correct sugar content there.
And Claire, we have a couple questions from folks asking, are there other things you're hoping to grow besides the corn? Are there other crops or varieties that you're looking to expand this work into in the future?
Yeah, the crops we mentioned have sort of been the focus of this project, and I foresee those continuing to be the main focus. Maybe adding in, but maybe we've certainly grown the most number of corn varieties, and so I could see really expanding out the seed rematriation work with some of the other crops as well. There are a lot of different types of amaranth and sunflowers and squash and beans, and those, aside from just the UW Arboretum project, a lot of the grower network that Dan mentioned have been working with a number of different types of those crops and varieties.
And so we have a final question here coming in from Natasha, and I think, Dan, I'll throw this one to you. She's wondering, did you use sumac spiles for tapping the trees that you showed?
No, sumac, I guess my issue with sumac is that it's so wide that I don't really think it's very good for the tree to use sumac. In general, you want to really minimize how much disturbance that you're creating to the tree itself. And sumac is really wide. We did use a traditional spile that more of a flat wide piece of wood. That my understanding, that was really one of the main historic ways that people tap trees, and so you're just getting the very outside of that cambium layer in the tree, so your sugar content's higher, and then the tree can heal faster. When you go wide, when you go deep, it's just creating more of damage to that tree and providing a vector for disease to come in. So we really try to minimize it. So we didn't use sumac for that one.
Well, Dan and Claire, thank you so much for joining us to share your story and your expertise and your work. I think I speak for all of our viewers that this is fascinating and important, and we really appreciate everything that you're doing, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, a reminder that Expo is still going strong, and coming up here at 2 p.m., there is the virtual Ask the Experts with the Wisconsin Extension. So any questions that we haven't been able to answer for you today, that'll be your chance, and some Let's Grow Stuff coming up right after that. And also, we're getting ready to film a new season of Let's Grow Stuff. So if there's a topic you want us to cover, let us know, and send those topic ideas to gardenexpo@pbswisconsin.org. Stay tuned, and we'll see you soon.